In this modeling tutorial, we're going to model the base of this vintage Atari game controller. It's designed for people new to Blender and polygon modeling who want to hone their skills. It's broken into sections tackling different aspects of the modeling process, and I'm including a start file for each progressive section in case you simply want to start at a given point. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing that we want to do is just look at the fact that I've got lines here that are going to help us and guide us in the process of modeling, much like having a template. I've already got a controller collection at the top. Press Shift and A, and we're going to add in a cube. Make it 4.5 inches. That's our starting point. We're going to be switching an awful lot between X-ray and non-X-ray mode. That is Option Alt-Z on the PC. So let's come into the front. Come into edit mode, so tab, and then hover the mouse up above, press S, and then Z, pull this down until it matches those lines. Now, let me also point out the fact that I frequently do not work in perspective when I'm in front, top, left, etc. So you can toggle that just by pressing that button in case you're not used to that. The next thing that we need to do is consider the fact that there is rounding around the corners. And this is going to be a really good demonstration of something that I demonstrate in many videos when it comes to hard body modeling and curving surfaces that transition into flat surfaces. We're going to select all of these edges, and we're going to come over to our friend the bevel tool. Let's take this up to a value of 8 and a shape of 0.5, and click this and pull out. You can see that it rounds that with the fillet function. That's very useful. But when we come up into the top and we take a look at this, let me turn off the profiles temporarily. You can see that in fact we have this curvature coming into a long flat face area. And when we subdivide this, it's going to bring that curvature ever so slightly into this flat area, and we don't want that to happen. So what we need to do in advance is put some boundary polygons there. I'm going to switch over to the active tool because that will allow me to select this edge and operate on it and the other edges at the same time. It's a little bit more convenient for this application. We're going to switch bevel tool to a default of 2 and a shape of 1. And then let's actually do this. Let's come to the top. I am actually going to have us turn back on the profiles, and I've got an edge there and an edge there to demarcate where we want the boundary of the curvature on the corner. In fact, this is a good example of where maybe I should switch back over to select box because I don't have anything to click and to hold on, which is what Active Tool would allow me to do. And that means I need to find this little widget in the middle. Now I can click, hold, and drag, and I can pull this out. And I want to just extend past those boundary lines just a little bit. And there you can see that we have what are going to function as boundary edges. Now we'll come back over and select those 4 corner edges again. And now we're free to reconfigure the tool to a value of 8 and 0.5. And this is where I like to switch over to Active Tool because then I can just click, hold, and drag and pull out. Go ahead now and divide this in half or into quadrants. I should have done that in the beginning. I'm going to come back to the Move tool. We're going to do that using the Knife tool. Press K, and we hover on this top edge, hold the Shift key, and that will snap it to the center of the edge. Click. I want to move just along the Y-axis. Press Y, and then press the C key, and that will make sure that the cut goes all the way through, and hit return. And when we rotate, you can see it's gone all the way through. Let's come back into the top view, press the K key again on this edge, Shift, click, release, Shift, come over to the other side, press the X key, and then press the C key and click. Then return, and we have quadrants set up. When we look at the controller, there's this big bevel on it, and that's what we're going to model now. Select the object. Let's come into the front view. You can see that I have lines here and here that demarcate where those are going to be. There are a couple ways that we could go about doing this. I'm going to press Option Z, select face, select this, this, by holding the shift key, select those top faces, hold the shift key again and select these bottom, come into the top view, Option Z to go into X-ray, and there we can see the boundary that I've set up in the template. Press the I key and then inset until we basically match right there. Scroll up, Option Z again to leave X-ray mode, come back over into Edge, double click here, hold the shift key, double click here, front, Option Z, and then come up kind of to the top, press the S key and then Z, and then match to that template. There we go. We look at the final model, we've got a button and we need to set that up. We're going to come into the top, focus down on this bottom corner, switch over into vertex mode, and we want to isolate this point. Press Shift and S and do cursor to selected. And then press Shift and A, add a circle. Now you can see that my circle has been set up with the values that I've tested. We want 32 vertices, which matches the number of edges that I have around the edge. We used a value of 8 for the fillet, times 4 gives us 32. And we'll just set the radius to a default of 0.5 inches. It doesn't need to be an exact size. Option Z takes us back into wireframe. Now we need to get it at the center of where this radius would be. The circle itself was dropped inside of the edit mode, so it's now just a mesh that's part of the entire mesh that we're working with, but it can still be operated on numerically when it's selected by itself. I'm going to select this other vertex. I'm going to select that twice to get the one on top selected. We can look along the y-axis. The value for y for that particular vertex is this value. Hover over that entry. You don't even need to click it. Copy that, and then select any vertex along here and do a Command or Control L, which is a select connected. And then we just simply come back up to Y here and paste that value to get it up. The next thing that we need to do is get this to be the right size to match this radius. We're going to use the scale function, but we're going to enable snapping to make this work correctly. Click it to make sure we're in vertex mode, and we want to be snapping relative to the active element of all the selected elements, and we want to have scale mode enabled. Hold the Shift key and select this vertex, and then select it again, and that becomes the active element. And I'll rotate the view so we can really see this. Press the S key and then pull out until we reach that point, and boom, it snaps and it matches. And that's exactly what we need to happen. It's an unfilled element, and so press the F key to fill that, and then the E key, and just move it up an arbitrary distance just so that it is above the existing object. Option Z, and there we go. We're going to be merging these two different topologies. But first, what I need to do is add some bevels around the large bevel edges. If we take a look, we can see that there's rounding happening, and that's what we want to model. So I'm going to go into edge mode, double click here, double click. Now it's stopping because these are n-gons. It doesn't quite know what to do when we double click. Should it come over here? Should it come over here? So just hold the Shift key and double click these edges, come to the bottom, double click, holding Shift key. There are a couple of ways we could have done it, but this is just easy. I will zoom down. We're going to use our friend the bevel tool. We want to reset it back to a value of 2 and the shape of 1. This is where I want to switch back to active tool. It's going to be easier to click, hold, and drag. My eye is going to be watching this edge because I roughly want to match up to any existing geometry that we might have. Click, hold, and drag, and just pull out until we reach, and it intersects about right there. So we are going to have some oddball intersection here, but that's okay. We can totally deal with this. Come into face mode, and we need to separate this cylinder. Command Control L, bring up the context menu and do a separate function. It becomes its own object. Press the Tab key to leave edit mode and come down here to cube 001. Rename that cylinder just so it's really clear and obvious. We need to merge that in with the Boolean function, but we do it by coming to the main object, down to our modifier stack, and we're going to add a Boolean function. We need to specify which object, come up to cylinder. I can turn off cylinder, it remains a separate object, but now we've just got a basic intersection, but we want a union to happen between the two. Once that's done, this is going to be something we need to merge and then come into edit mode. They're merged, but there's still some overlapping vertices. For instance, if I come over, press the G key, you can see that there is some geometry from the merging, and we need to clean that up. We are still in snapping, and that's going to function well for us. So press the G key, and then Z, come down until you snap to one of these edges, and there we go. So we've got a bunch of overlapping collapsed geometry. Press the A key so we can merge it, switch over into vertex mode, bring up the context menu, and then come down to vertices by distance. And it should say at the very bottom, removed 27 vertices. Well, we can double check that now by coming over. Let me turn off snapping. I'm going to select one of these, press the G key, and you can see there's no problem anymore. We don't have any overlapping vertices. Since we have this selected, let's inset this because a button will sit inside. Move the cursor outside a bit, press the I key for inset. We'll pull in just a little ways like that, and then press the E key and pull down, and then the X key to delete that face. Because we're going to be focusing a lot of attention in this area, we really need to divide this into half so that we can use the mirror function is what we're actually going to use. I'm going to come into the top, and we need to divide this in half. We're going to be doing it at an angle. We'll go into vertex mode so we can easily see the vertices. So I want to find where that middle point is right here. Press the K key, click here. It's going to go right through the center, and we'll come over to the exact other side, that corner point, click and return. Now, if we look at the bottom, it didn't transfer to the bottom because I didn't press the C key, but that's okay because we are actually going to just remove it. We're never going to see it. It's geometry that I don't want to work about. Let's come back into the top view, and we need to remove the half that we aren't going to be working on. Press the Tab key, come up to the transform area again, and if it's not up for you, and under rotate, we're going to rotate around the Z axis by 45 degrees. Press the Tab key. We're going to switch over into X-ray mode. So Option Z, you always know you're in X-ray mode when you're in face because you get the dots here. Those are what you select. We are going to switch over to select the box, and then I can marquee around the half that I don't need very carefully like that. X key to remove those faces. And then Tab key leaves edit mode, and we can remove that rotation. So now we need to figure out how to mirror that. I want to make sure I'm adding an empty object at the center of our world. Press Shift S, and we're going to return the cursor to the world origin, which is where the object origin is. Press Shift and A, and we're going to add just a plain axis empty. Let's make sure it's small. I put in 1 inch to make sure it's small there. We're going to rotate it around the Z axis by the same 45 degrees. And we can see that rotate. Now, I am also in local. So if you were in global, you wouldn't necessarily note or see that it had fully changed. So that's where you would come over and set this to local. And then we want to use the local x-axis for the mirror operation. Come over to the mirror modifier. By default, it's going to use the world axis system. So instead, we're going to reference our empty, and there it uses the empty's local x-axis. We need to add a little bit of detail before we can move on. I'm going to switch over into edge mode, double click there, come back to our bevel tool. We have 2 and 1, which is what we want, and I can grab this and I can just add a little bit of a bevel right there. That works pretty well. We'll come over now to our loop cut function, click and pull out till we get right about there. These are functioning as control loops for the shape of our subdivision surface. So now we need to kind of figure out what it is that we're going to do in terms of this, because we've got this big n-gon and we want to have a nice subdivision rounding coming over here. And we need to have hopefully a patchwork of quad-based polygons with a few triangles sprinkled out. And it's okay to have a few triangles here and there. So we need to have a loop coming down on this side of it. And that's what we're going to figure out now. In order to do this, we're going to take some existing geometry and imprint it back onto the geometry after we've offset it. So I'm going to select some edges. We've got intersecting points right there, which is totally okay. I'm just holding the Shift key and selecting down around till we get right about there. I will press Shift and D. Escape key returns it back to its original position. Bring up the context menu, separate that to become its own object, which we can see right here. And I'm going to call this imprinted edges, just so it's very clear what those are. I'm going to double click right here, but we have this issue where we don't know exactly where the center is because we're using symmetry on the object. Select this edge and we'll find the other edge on the opposite side. Hold the Shift key, bring up the context menu, and we're going to bridge edge loops. Then I can select this edge, do a Shift S, and do a cursor to selected. And now that is at the very center of this circular region. Just delete that face, X key, faces. Now we can leave edit mode and we can jump back over to this imprinted edge, tab key, come over into vertex mode, A key. Let's look at this in the top. Press the S key, but it's going to scale right here, and we don't want it. We want it to scale from where the 3D cursor is. So press the period key and tell the pivot point to go where the 3D cursor is. Now I can press the S key and I can kind of pull that out. My eye is watching right down here where that vertex intersects a line. Perfect. Now I'm going to move this up just a little bit. Tab key leaves edit mode. We come back to this object, tab, and the way that we're about to use the knife project function. We come over and select that imprinted object. So we're going to hold the Command P or Control P on the PC to select that. And you're going to note that there's also a version over here. So if we select this imprinted, the modifier attached with it, I'm going to remove that so that we're not, let me undo it. So I get the right object. So I need to leave edit mode, turns out, because I only want to select this one object. There we go. And I want to remove that. And then we can come back over into edit mode for the primary object, hold that Command or Control key down to select that as a secondary selection. You need to come into the top view because it uses the view as a projection axis. So whatever axis you're looking down is the axis that it uses for projection. And then you come up to Mesh and do a knife project and watch what happens. It generates polygons based on that as an input for the polygon boundary. So I'm going to press the Tab key, and I just want to come up here to this imprinted edge, and I want to turn that off, or you could press the X key to remove it altogether. So we'll come back over here, Tab. It's generated a little bit too much geometry at the top. We'll dissolve those edges as opposed to deleting them, so it's non-destructive. That leaves the n-gon in its place. Let's come over into vertex mode, and we need to begin patching this all together. So some things we need to remove and some things we need to patch. Let's start with something really obvious. We can see right here that I didn't get quite close enough. I'll select that vertex and we're going to dissolve that edge. And what you want your eye to begin trained to look for are loops of polygons. I'll select this edge, hold the Shift key and select that, bring up the context menu and do a connect to vertex path, and then do the same thing here, Shift R, and then down here, Shift R. In edge mode, I don't need this edge, so I'm going to dissolve that. So there we go. We have a loop of polygons. We have a bit of a mess in this area. There are multiple ways that we could deal with this. The first thing that we want to establish is the fact that we're working with planar regions in a couple of areas. And this is what I want you to really be aware of, where your planar regions are, because that's where you will have flexibility. So I'm going to select a single polygon, this big polygon up here. We're going to come down to select linked flat faces. And this tells me where all of those planar faces are on the top. Likewise, we could do the same thing. Select that big face, do a select linked flat faces, and these are all planar to each other. So that gives us clues as to how we can approach the modeling for each area, which gives me a sense for what we can do in terms of patching these areas together, because it is a bit odd to have polygons in the middle, but because this is all planar, we don't really need to honor so much the curvature on the interior area. So what I'm going to do is I will select this vertex, hold the Shift key, select this, and we're going to do merge at last. And I think this one, I'm going to take this, come to here, press Shift R, and we'll do the same thing right there. These two vertices we don't need, so we're going to dissolve those. Okay, and so we've sort of patched this together in a little bit of a better way. You know, I think we could even adjust this a little bit more. I'm going to take this vertex, hold the Shift key and come to that point, bring up the context menu again and do an at last. And that gives me one sort of anchor point where these different topologies come together. And it gives me this traveling loop of quads, and we'll have one triangle right there. But even that triangle, we could probably adjust a little bit by pressing the K key. And I can come here, go to there, enter, and then if I simply go into edge mode, I can take these two edges and dissolve those edges, and then I have another quad there and a quad there, even though it's a little bit irregular, but we've reduced the number of triangles that we have, which does tend to give you the best subdivision, but it's okay if you have a triangle. This is very common when you have intersecting topologies. Now I'm going to have us come in and we want to sort of complete this. We don't want to just leave big n-gons in this area. Press the K key and I'm going to follow along on this edge and terminate right to about there. Do a right click, come here, and then we'll just sort of follow that until it gets about right there. And then this I'm going to complete right there and hit return. And then we can come into the front view and we're going to complete these down. Press the K key again. This knife tool is so useful. Click Z key and then the C key so it travels all the way through the object, and click and return. And then we'll repeat that. And there we go. So we've got that patched up into that patch of quad-based polygons primarily with a couple of triangles. And then here, what I want to do is let's look at this in the top. Do the same thing. Click here, Y key, and then click right there and return. And that just kind of isolates this area that we're working on and leaves this a nice regular set of quads over there. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is add some constraining polygons, is what I call them, a counterpart to these polygons, but along this wall. Otherwise, it's going to subdivide up, and I want this to be a little bit more controlled in terms of the rounding down there. Let's zoom down over here. We have one of the original edges. Come into edge mode, double click that. We will switch over to the edge slide function. And this is where we want to switch over preferentially to the active tool mode. And then we can click, hold, and drag on that. I'll move it right there. And then in vertex mode, select this, bring up the context menu and do a merge at last. There we go. Now, we need to add a similar row of polygons that we have right here, this boundary, because we have an obvious angled edge right there, and we want the rounding to happen here in a controlled way. So I will press the K key, and we'll start right there at that anchor point, and I'm just going to mark out generally parallel new loop of polygons. I'll get to this point, hit return, and then I can easily just switch into the front view, K, click, X key, click and return, and I've established that. Now we need to do the same thing up here. In fact, let's come into front view so we do this very regularly. K key, and I'm just going to come right here, click X, come over here and click and return, and that's much easier to do. Now we've got a quad here, but it's this really kind of odd based quad, and that's okay. You know, we've got a couple of these areas where we have these, and in fact, we could probably readjust this. So if I came over here and took this edge and dissolved it, then we could do K and we could just take this and re-anchor it, return, and so we actually have a quad here that follows this loop, and this looks like a triangle, but it's now technically a quad. So these are kind of nuanced areas, but it's going to work. So let's do this. Let's come in. We're at a place where we could turn on subdivision, and we can generally analyze our work up to this point. So let's add a subdivision modifier, and we want to turn this up to at least 2. Optimal display isn't really going to show what we want. So we're going to turn over so we can see the polygons, and we're just going to analyze this by switching over into shaded mode. We need to turn on auto smooth. So let's press the tab key to leave edit mode. Let's turn on shade auto smooth and then option Z to go on to X-ray, and look at that. So we've got these two topologies matched up. There's a little bit of fine-tuning work that we could do. I'm going to press the tab key. Let's switch back over into wireframe. If we look at this, I'm going to select, we're in edge mode. I'm going to select this edge. And we have a thin polygon here that's subdividing into this long polygon. And it would be nice because both of these, this polygon and this polygon, are planar to each other. Come up to edge and we can do a edge crease operation, and you just begin mousing left to right, and look how it adjusts those. It prevents the subdivided child polygons from passing that boundary, and that gives you curvature in the best possible way in that area. So let's double click this edge on the bottom, Shift R to repeat that command. And we're gonna invoke that in a couple of other places. For instance, we could do it along here. Let's select this edge, hold the Shift key, select that edge, Shift R, and that will just make sure that we have concentration of polygons. It's not allowing those subdivided polygons to pass that boundary. Really great for hard body modeling, and we can take a look at how that's forming, looking really good. Let's go ahead and re-mirror this. The mirror got thrown out at some point. I'm going to turn off subdivision, come back up, turn on the modifier again for mirror. We need to reselect that empty, which functions as our mirror point. And then let's move this to the top. We'll apply that mirror. So it's baked in now. Press the tab key. And what we want to do first off is come to the very center, do a Shift S and cursor to selected, and then we're going to just completely remove the top. We're about to put in the big circular hole area where the actual joystick controller is going to sit. We're not going to model that in this tutorial, but that's where it will sit. So I'm selecting these, X key to delete those faces. Press Shift and A, add a circle there. It might be pretty enormous. I'm going to initially just drop this down to 1 inch. And if we switch over into top view, we still have the profiles enabled, and I've got a profile there that I've marked out as the size that I want. We're going to leave it at 32 segments. I'll press S to scale that up, get it pretty close. In order to bridge these, we're about to try and create the cap for this area. We need to first fill this. Press the F key, but an important thing is to check the topology at this point in terms of face orientation. When I do that, you can see that they generated that face in the inverse direction to everything else. Come up to mesh, normal, and flip. That's very important. That would have given us bridge problems if we didn't do that correctly. Switch over into edge mode. The great thing about Blender's bridge function is it doesn't require matching edge numbers. Holding the Shift key, double click any edge on the interior, bring up the context menu, and then do bridge edge loops. Look at that. So this is one of those situations where a bunch of odd-shaped triangular forms is going to be just fine because they're all planar. Come to the interior polygon, this n-gon, I key, inset just a little bit, and then the E key and drop that down just a little bit once, E key, do it again, and then the X key to remove that face. We have a situation now where we're going to want to apply hard edges to these interior loops, but they're not going to select easily. What I'm going to do is select a top face in this planar region. Come back up to Select, Linked, Flat Faces, and there we can see all of these polygons. The reason we don't really worry so much about what these look like is because they're all in this planar region. We want to do a select, more, less, less, and then we switch over into edge mode, come back up to select, and then do loops, select loop boundaries, and there we go. We've got those selected. We do have one little oddball area here, but it's really nothing to worry about. And in fact, let's turn subdivision back on so we can really readily see this. Switch over into wireframe. This will become very apparent. We'll come up and do an edge crease operation and then just begin mousing to the right. It initially may not move until suddenly it starts moving. You can also just click, come here, and then drag this up, and look at that. It prevents the subdivided geometry here and from these thin polygons from essentially mixing together, and it makes that interior area remain completely flat. Okay, there we go. Pull out, come over to shaded view, tab leaves edit mode. We can look at this in perspective. And there we have it finished. Again, we're not going to model the handle part in this tutorial, but I wanted to show you how it's possible to achieve hard body modeling like this, where we mix topologies.